If you're looking to visit one of the top battlefields in Virginia and check out some of the earthworks that are out here, then look no further than Cold Harbor. One of the top locations for you to visit out here for Cold Harbor is the actual Battlefield Visitor Center itself. Directly behind me, you can see some of the earthworks stretched out. You can walk and see the various different type of earthworks out here. They have plenty of trails for you to see and plenty of earthworks in different locations. And some of them are quite tall. You're not supposed to be getting on these earthworks, but it's real neat walking around and seeing things that were built 160 years ago, just laying on the ground, just ready for you to take a look at and kind of imagine what it would have been like to be here at that point in time. Now, Cold Harbor itself was one of the battles of the Overland Campaign that happened out here when Grant was doggedly pursuing Lee south. He'd just come from the North Anna River and crossed over the Pamunkey, and now we're looking at the two armies facing each other here. This doesn't turn out so good for Grant and the Union Army. It turns out to be a victory for Lee, but it's only temporary before Grant ends up in Petersburg, laying siege to Petersburg. It's works like the ones that lay directly behind me here, if you can see over my shoulder, that make the trip worth the while out here. And this is definitely one of the top spots for you to come out and take a look at these types of earthworks. I highly recommend you come out here during winter time, because all the growth that's usually over top of these works are gone, and the leaves are all gone, and it kind of adds to the bulk of those earthworks as well. So it really gives you a sense or a feel for what these earthworks would have looked like when they were full up and ready. Now, 160 years ago, when the men came out here to these Confederate lines, they were using a lot of the things that they had learned throughout their time in the Army. They had learned how to build these trench works or these fortifications and strengthen them with wood and different types of items that they had. They were building these fortifications in a hurry, and a lot of times, depended upon how well you built fortifications, depended on whether or not you were going to live to see another day. So these men worked as hard and as fast as they could to get these things put together out here. And still today, 160 plus years later, these fortifications are standing. The wood is all but gone, but the dirt still stands high. And still today, it looks like a place that you could stand behind and hide if you had to, in the face of someone trying to shoot at you, which is exactly what a lot of them had to do. So off directly behind me, Hoke and Anderson would have been in those Confederate trenches that we're talking about directly off in this direction here. And we have Wright coming up, the 18th Corps coming up, and they fight somewhere generally in here. The Confederates in those trenches behind me there end up smashing them easily. This is the grand assault that Grant was supposed to be launching, and this is only just a tiny portion of it. The largest portion of it is about 2 miles from here, and that unfortunately is not as well preserved as this place is. But there was at least some form of victory here for that 18th. They got pretty close, and they ended up getting repelled very easily by the Confederates that are over here. But this entire battle here at Cold Harbor is always known for the massive losses that took place at this field. And even Grant himself talks about regretting making this assault. It doesn't seem like he regrets giving the orders or planning it out. It's more along the lines of he probably regrets the assault for the fact that if you reflect on it and look at it, it looks like Grant thinks that maybe his officers, his general officers, didn't execute this plan very well. He had every reason to believe that he was going to win here. The plan looked like it, and the forces completely outnumbered Robert E. Lee. So he had every chance in the world to win. It just wasn't going to happen for him here at Cold Harbor. Now in a minute we'll talk about the 8th New York, or the Bloody 8th. It was an artillery unit that came up from the Washington defenses, but for now we're going to talk about the 2nd Connecticut. Now I'm standing in a position where the 2nd Connecticut was June 1st of 1864, and they stepped off from over here, and directly behind me is a monument to the 2nd Connecticut. It's one of the only monuments out here on this part of the national battlefield. A man by the name of Kellogg was in charge of one of the battalions out here, and he went with that 1st battalion and 1,500 men across this field. They had some success because they captured a portion of the earthworks over there, and they were able to take about 300 prisoners, but in the process they lost nearly 330 men themselves. The fight was for naught. They ended up having to give up this position anyways and retreat back across the field. But when you come out here, this is one of the unique places that you can actually stop and take a look at one of these monuments, read about the men that fought here, and position yourself in the footsteps of these soldiers. The 2nd Connecticut, right here on that first successful charge across these fields. Another one of the top places to visit out here at Cold Harbor is the cemetery that's out here. There are various Civil War soldiers that are buried out here. One in particular, Augustus Berry, was a Medal of Honor recipient, and he was also a caretaker of this cemetery. I'm just now passing the row where Medal of Honor recipient Augustus Berry was buried. Now, Augustus Berry was an immigrant. He was born in Ireland in 1840, and he came over to the United States. Before too long, he found himself in the middle of a civil war, just like many of the other men at that time. Augustus Berry fought in the Western Theater. Now, we don't know much about the actions that he took to earn that Medal of Honor, but according to his citation, it was for various actions in Tennessee and Georgia, meaning basically the entire Western Theater was his citation. But Augustus Berry, coming from New York, ends up down here in Virginia and Mechanicsville, and as was customary at that time, these national cemeteries started popping up, and they started putting veterans in charge of taking care of these cemeteries as caretakers. So Augustus Berry, Sergeant Major Augustus Berry, ends up becoming the caretaker here at Cold Harbor. And on Thursday, August 6th, 1871, they found him dead here, basically in the guardhouse located on the grounds. Now, Augustus Berry had just received his Medal of Honor roughly about 1 year prior to that. If you're ever in the Cold Harbor area and you'd like to come out and visit that Medal of Honor recipient, he's buried in Section A, grave number 309. And you can see it right here in front of me, that one right there. It's directly 3 rows behind the actual guardhouse itself. And he's in a row with the rest of his brothers. Another interesting thing here at the Cold Harbor National Cemetery is the sarcophagus that's put in place honoring the 889 Union soldiers that were gathered from the battlefields of Mechanicsville, Savage Station, Gaines Mill, and the vicinity of Cold Harbor. This is just one of a handful of things here at this small cemetery that you can come out here and see while you're visiting and exploring the battlefield of Cold Harbor. Another one of the top locations to visit out here is the Garrett House, which is right down the street from the National Cemetery, right behind me here. Try to travel back in time a little bit if you can, and think back to 1862. The 7 days battles are taking place, and Gaines Mill is just down the street. This house behind me here is sitting dead center of some of the charges that take place at Gaines Mill, because the front of Gaines Mill is a very long stretch, anywhere between 4 and 6 miles long. Then you fast forward, it's 1864, the Overland Campaign is happening. General Grant has taken charge of the entire United States forces. He's out here at the crossroads, and he's trying to secure the crossroads that head into Richmond. And this house, yet again, is in the center of two massive armies, as another army is charging against the other. You can imagine the occupants of this house were probably not too thrilled about being in the center of all of this attention. And then, of course, the house itself has been used multiple times at that point as field hospitals for soldiers that were dying and wounded from the battles that took place in and around this area. Now, on the property itself, just to the left-hand side if you're looking out from the house, is a family cemetery that was put here a long time ago. Mr. Hooper was buried here first, and he was a person that was out here in the 1700s. Afterwards, the McGees and the Garthrights lived in and around this area, and those people were buried, some of them in this family plot, this cemetery. And additionally, it is thought that some soldiers that died out here on the fields were also buried here in this family plot or this family cemetery. During the reinterment of the remains in 1866, when they were digging bodies back up off these battlefields, they were able to pull some of the remains up out here and relocate those remains to the National Cemetery right across the street at Cold Harbor National Cemetery. Another note to make here about this cemetery is it's still unknown to this day as to whether or not there are still Union remains out here buried in this family cemetery. There could still be some out here. There could still be some in and around the fields here, no doubt, where the battlefields have merged and crossed. Again, there was a lot of death and destruction that took place out here with the 7 days battles, Cold Harbor, and the soldiers constantly skirmishing and firing and shooting at each other. So it is a very big possibility that there are still Union and Confederate soldiers out here in these fields, buried, never to be recovered. And one of the notable deaths that happened out here was a Sergeant Major Wyckoff, Voorhees Wyckoff. When the battle opened up out here, Wyckoff was somewhere on the Garthright family farm, and he was shot through the head, mortally wounded. Laying dead on the yard there, they eventually had to bury him out here on the field. And when they came back and find bodies, they found his, and he ended up being placed across the street there in the National Cemetery where we were just at. So Voorhees Wyckoff is also another soldier that fought here at Cold Harbor that you can visit at the Cold Harbor National Cemetery. Now today when you walk out here on these paths, you're walking a wooded area. During the time of the battle, most of these fields were actually cleared farmlands. There's plenty of maps that were drawn at the time to show exactly what these soldiers had to deal with. In the area I'm at right now, there wouldn't have been a stitch of trees out here. This whole place would have been cleared for farming. Directly across the street, just on the other side of where the cemetery is, there would have been a wooded area. And that's the extent of the woods out here. Now hopefully you can see what I'm looking at here, but directly on the ground behind me is one very large rifle pit. There are several rifle pits that are placed out here at this walking battle park right across the street from the National Cemetery. It is thought that this is the forward reserve line, or one of a series of lines of where soldiers would be passing back and forth information or word to get more troops up or to fall back as a fallback point. Also, supplies could be hand carried and moved from rifle pit to rifle pit and then brought forward if necessary. Again, this area, all of this behind me here, is cleared out fields. You can see all the way down to where the visitor center is if you're here in 1864. This rifle pit is a deep depression so that you can crawl inside, keep your head low, and keep from getting hit by sharpshooters in the Confederate trenches across the way. I'll read to you an excerpt from an officer's writing that's out here on a sign at Cold Harbor. It's one of the more interesting moments in time out here at this battle. Horace Porter wrote, "As I came near one of the regiments which was making preparations for the next morning's assault, I noticed that many of the soldiers had taken off their coats and seemed to be engaged in sewing up rents in them. This exhibition of tailoring seemed rather peculiar at such a moment, but upon closer examination, it was found that the men were calmly writing their names and addresses on slips of paper and pinning them to the backs of their coats so that their dead bodies might be recognized upon the field, and their fate made known to their families at home. Such courage is more than heroic, it is sublime." You'll have to understand that at that moment in time, there was no such thing as dog tags. So these soldiers, afraid that they would have what they called a bad death, not a good death, were putting their information inside their coats, realizing that the grand assault that was about to happen was probably going to be their last. They didn't want to end up like a lot of their comrades earlier in the war, dead on a field somewhere, only to be stumbled across again in another year or two, bleached bones turned upright to the sky. Now the trench works, just like the ones that are over my shoulder here, these trenches became the home of these Union soldiers that were out here for the next 12 to 14 days. These guys were in here and digging deep, trying to keep themselves protected and safe as they were waiting on orders of where they were supposed to go and what they were supposed to do. Nothing came for a while, but it was described as a horrible situation to be in, because as these guys are out here, they're dug in, trying to protect themselves. Not a single man on the line could stand erect, according to one officer, without a sharpshooter across the way for picking them off and killing them. So the entire time that they're out here, they're hunkered down in these trenches, and it's only so deep, so it's not like they can get up and stretch out. And they're waiting for orders, they're waiting for anything, holding their breath practically, hoping that they don't die out here at Cold Harbor. Now the position is directly over my shoulder here is an artillery position that was about 400 yards off in the distance from where the Confederates would have been out here at Cold Harbor. They were firing from this position towards Confederates with some pretty good accuracy, and the Confederates were firing back, but most of the shells were actually being lobbed in front of this position or over its head. Confederate artillery had a lot of problems with doing things such as that, and this was no different here at Cold Harbor. Now, starting from this position, a group called the Bloody 8th New York, took off from here and went to attack Lee and his positions directly in front of me. The Bloody 8th was an artillery unit, and they joined Grant's men midway through the overland campaign. This was the first real assault that they had been in. Here at this location, they suffered the most casualties of all the units in this assault. 505 men fell as a result of this assault, forever to be known as the Bloody 8th, the 8th New York. And in that national cemetery, there's a monument dedicated to them. Now, the Bloody 8th's commander was Peter Porter, and he was right at the front with that unit fighting. It was said that he fell with his gallant dad right before the Earthworks at the Confederate lines, and he was forever remembered for his bravery and fighting alongside of his own men, trying to take those positions with the Bloody 8th. If you can imagine being an artillery unit, brand new to fighting, never really in infantry, you join this unit, this army, for the first time just a little bit earlier, and now you're out here fighting and trying to survive and take a position. And they fought just as well as any other unit out here. If ever Grant had a Fredericksburg, Cold Harbor would have been it. The losses here, comparatively to the two sides, was very drastic. One side, roughly 5,000, the other side, 13,000. Completely outgeneraled when it came to the regular officers that had been given orders. The delay cost the Union Army dearly out here. But after the 12th of June, when the Union Army decides to pull out and Grant decides to move towards Petersburg and cut off those supply lines, he ends up pinning Robert E. Lee's army down in Petersburg for nearly 9 months, which results in capture at Appomattox and the surrender of the forces that would have been known as the Army of Northern Virginia, successfully completing this chapter here in Virginia. Well, once again, it's been fun taking you guys out to see some of the locations, some of my favorite spots. For me, for the Battle of Cold Harbor and Cold Harbor National Park, this is that was the top 4 spots for me to visit. There's always many other places that you can run into, so check out your Civil War Trails signs. Go online to the Civil War Trails website and get a comprehensive map. They'll also mail you one if you want it. And then, of course, for more information, go to the American Battlefield Trust website and get a breakdown analysis of the battles that took place at these locations. Until next time, this is History with Waffles.